This entry in the Path to Electronic Trading series is sponsored by CQG.
My background is accounting. I joined the O'Brien organization in '87 as the CFO. I had no exposure. I didn't understand. I didn't really had to spend any time on the floor of the Board of Trade. 1988 was a drought year in the farmland in the United States, and there's all sorts of intense volatility at the Board of Trade. And so we knew it was going to be very busy. And I went down there on the Tuesday morning, and there was energy. There was pizzazz down on that floor, the colors, the people, the informalities of the floor that made it so great. I was instantly captured by it all. But when that bell rang and opened up the corn and the beans, it was complete mayhem. And I'm just observing things, and I was like, what is going on here? Our phones are all lit up. The lights are... People can't answer every call that's coming. People have, 2 phones, all the lights are on, they're writing orders, they're handing it to runners, and I'm watching this mayhem, and I'm starting to understand, why we're getting so many complaints about RGO service on the floor. It was just too much business, and the modernization and the popular use of futures for risk management, really, the growth of that couldn't be supported any longer by the old infrastructure of the Board of Trade. So I started thinking about things like, how do we deal with this? There was issues at every element. One, you couldn't grow your business because there wasn't any additional booth space. Every booth was consumed by people. Every booth had 2 or 3 phones. You could only have 2 clerks in a booth, so they could have 4 phones operating at one time. All the orders were run into the pit by runners who made $140 a week, and you'd give them a stack of paper, and they're just out there in front of the broker's clerks trying to get the paper from the runner to the clerk to the broker. And that was taking, in some cases, hours. And then, on top of it, when the broker filled the paper and it got endorsed, they just threw the paper on the floor. I don't know if people recall that, but they would throw it on the floor. And now it was our job for the runners to find orders that were RGO orders, get them back to the desk, and call those fills back, which was impossible. So you look on the floor of the Board of Trade, there's paper everywhere, and there's runners everywhere on their hands and knees trying to find paper. That spawned my idea that this business has to be technology enabled. And it wasn't like, at that point, thinking how to disintermediate the broker on the floor. It was, how can we be way more efficient on the floor to get order flow into the hands of the brokers in an efficient fashion, get it filled, and get it reported back to the customer so that they could make their risk management decisions on whether they're filled or not and at what price. One of the things we did to get fills back quickly was we made our order forms unique. We, at the time, I think most of them were green, but we put shamrocks on ours, we put RGO everywhere on it. So when the runners were on the floor looking for paper, they could easily identify RGO paper on the floor. So we're getting our fills out of the pit faster so we could report them to our customers. But then when you came back to the desk to report the fills, what's the most important thing at the desk? Is to grab the inbound calls, right? Get the orders to the floor, get people their fills. They're either entering a position or they're exiting a position. You got to get that back. But in the meantime, the fills are stacking up. Oh, on top of it, there's one other thing. As we grew, there was a reluctance to use speed dial in calling customers back. So we had, probably 100 IBs at the time, and every time a ticket came back, somebody had to look at the office number, look on a piece of paper, and dial it. So what we did was we reorganized all our account numbers at RGO. We reorganized them that every single IB at the time would have an office code, a 3-digit office code. And that 3-digit office code then coincided with a speed dial number. So when a clerk saw a piece of paper and saw Office 109, all they had to do was hit 109, And the next thing you know, they had the IB on the phone and they're reporting the fill. And the next level was like, wouldn't it be great if the IBs could just enter their orders on a screen and it would print up on the floor? So within a year, we had that capability where our IBs took our software, they were able to enter their order on a screen at their office, and it printed on the floor. We tore it off, gave it to a runner, and the runner brought it into the pit. Since there was no internet at the time, is we had leased lines, right? And the IBs to connect to our servers would have dial-in modems to get to us, and they'd keep it open. And although it wasn't the bandwidth we're accustomed to today, it was still very efficient to get an order. An order doesn't have a lot of data to it. You know, it has buy, sell, it has a price and some other key indicators on it. Then the next thing was like, wait a second, all that data is in the system. Why are we calling these orders back? So the next level of how this evolved was we figured out electronically through the developers that we could enter fills online. So, and because we already had all the order data in the system, all we had to do was enter the fill. So we'd pull up the ticket number. You bought 20 corn at $4.05, hit the button, and it went back to the customer. There were other early pioneers in the business. Brody White, Harry Jarecki was into this. I think at some point Lynn Waldock bought Brody White, and they had a great system as well. But this was it. It was it's capitalism at its best. I think that was really the beginning of the end for Open Outcry, was a desire for growth and efficiencies on how to get market orders in and out of the marketplace as quickly as possible. The exchanges realized the same issues we had, and now they were on board. You know, how do we sustain Open Outcry but in a really efficient way? And they introduced TOPS. I think there was two different systems at first. The CME had TOPS, and the Board of Trade had another system, which was expensive on the FCMs, you know, that we had to connect to two different products. But the platform that we had built, we were able to connect to the order routing systems of the exchanges, and eventually it was one TOPS. So once TOPS was in place, you had to get broker adoption. The brokers had to get their clerks to adopt it, right? Because that meant their clerk had to have a electronic page in front of them. They had to learn how to use it, and you know that wasn't so easy. And so we just interfaced into that. We didn't have to print tickets anymore. And when that order was filled at the TOPS clerk's station, then it was straight through processing back to our customer, back into the back office. It helped with real-time risk management procedures, but no, eventually the exchanges got on board, and it was a big help. When people started seeing quickness and getting fills back promptly, it also started the age of arbing in the grain room, where people started arbing orders for the institutional clients. Let's say 100 lots or higher, because people wanted to be on the phone. They wanted to know they were filled like that, because that's what was happening in the S&P futures pit and other areas. And the grain markets were a bit slow to adopt, but they eventually did. And then there was this massive surge by all the firms to have booth space that were right next to the pit. And there was a lot of politics back in the days on how to get the right booth, right? Did you have more bean customers because you want to be closer to the bean brokers? Or did you have more wheat business? Or did you have more corn business? And then there were, board of directors that controlled the booth space, and it was very political. There were booths that were awarded due to relationships versus need, which is just the way the system ran. So what did we do? You build relationships with the people that control the booths, and try to get your best foot forward for your customers. The ECs and the Cub units extended it past a clerk. It literally, brokers were holding these. The EC particularly. I think the EC in the end became the dominant technology versus Cubs. Cubs was it's like a station inside the pit, if I recall. And it wasn't so easy for a broker to be at a station and, transact a trade. Versus an EC was, I think they had belts with something on there, and they had something, and they could still do their work in the pit and have an EC in their hand. But the whole goal of all of this was to grow the exchanges and protect Open Outcry. It really was. The brokers resisted They felt differently about it. The brokers felt, well, eventually computers are going to replace what we do today, and they fought it tooth and nail. In the end, computers were going to be the end game for everybody, although we didn't see it initially coming. And a lot of brokers lost, I think, some great opportunities by resisting technology instead of embracing it over those last few years of open outcry.